Your Honor, this man is nothing but a freeloader, a burden I've carried for 22 years. That was the first thing my wife said in open court. Not good morning, not this is a mistake, no. She stood there beside the man she'd been sneaking around with, calling me a burden like she'd been waiting her whole life to finally spit it out. Ethan Rowe, her polished, slick attorney, just nodded along as if every lie she told was carved into stone. I didn't defend myself. I just clenched my jaw and let everyone in that courtroom judge me. 30 seconds later, the judge cleared his throat and read a single number out loud. My wife's face went pale, her knees buckled so hard the bailiff flinched. And trust me, what happened after that made this moment look small. Hit subscribe and tell me, what would you do if your wife tried to bury you in court? When Judge Keller said $450,000, the whole courtroom went quiet for a beat. Then the whispers started. You could feel people shifting on the benches, recalibrating whatever story they'd just bought about me. Behind me, some guy chuckled under his breath and said, "Hell, I wish I could freeload like that." A few people laughed, not loud, but loud enough. I just stood there, staring at a knot in the wooden rail in front of me, jaw locked so tight my teeth hurt. I'm not a perfect man. I've missed birthdays, ball games, anniversaries. I've come home late, bone-tired and half-present, but I am not a freeloader. For 22 years, I've kept my head down, busted my ass, paid the bills, put food on the table, kept a roof over our heads. I'm the quiet kind of man. No big speeches, no drama. You just show up, do your part, and hope that's enough. Turns out, sometimes it isn't. As I stood there letting a room full of strangers judge me, one thought settled in. If you really want to understand why I'm here, we've got to go back to where this all started. Back then, it was simple. I met Julia in my early 20s at a community college in Dayton. Cheap textbooks, bad coffee, parking lot full of cars that shouldn't still be running. We were both broke, stubborn, and convinced we were built for something better. We didn't have much, but we had plans. A small house someday, maybe a kid or two. A life that felt steady. The kind of life neither of us grew up with. I still remember our first place together. A cramped little duplex with thin walls and cheaper carpet. We didn't have a real couch yet, just 2 lawn chairs and a mattress on the floor. One night we sat on that floor, eating Wendy's chili straight from the cups, laughing at nothing until our sides hurt. No money in the bank, barely any food in the fridge, and somehow it felt like enough. When I landed my first IT job with a manufacturing company up along the Cleveland-Detroit corridor, I thought, this is it. This is how I change everything. In my head, the math was simple. If I worked hard, if I kept showing up, the rest would take care of itself. I had no idea that one day, that same work would be twisted into proof that I was dead weight. When we finally closed on that little ranch in Westerville, it felt like winning the lottery without ever buying a ticket. The place wasn't much. 1 story, old shingles, a driveway that cracked in 3 different directions. But it was ours. Weekends were simple. I'd be out front pushing a beat-up mower, sweat running down my back, lines in the grass almost straight. Julia would be in an old t-shirt, paint in her hair, touching up the white fence. Lily, still small enough to fit on my shoulders, would run around with the garden hose, soaking everything but the plants. Sunday mornings we'd hit Kroger for groceries, argue over off-brand cereal, then swing by Tim Hortons for cheap coffee. I'd sit there with a paper cup in my hand, looking at my wife and my kid, thinking, I did this. I put food on the table. I keep a roof over our heads. For a long time, that was enough for me. I honestly believed I was becoming the man I'd always promised myself I'd be. I just didn't see that the same drive that built this little life was already starting to pull me away from it. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. One promotion turned into a bigger contract. One contract turned into 3 cities instead of 1. Before I knew it, my calendar was a mess of flights and factory visits. Detroit on Monday, Cleveland midweek, Pittsburgh by Friday. I learned how to sleep sitting up in airport chairs. I knew which terminals had the quiet corners, which hotels left a cheap razor by the sink. I dragged myself through the front door at midnight, shoes in my hand, house dark, everyone already asleep. Julia started saying it quietly at first. "You're never here, Caleb." I'd fire back the only way I knew how. "I'm doing this for us. I'm the one paying the bills." On paper, I was winning. Income up, title better, house paid down. Inside the house, something else was happening. Dinners got quieter. Phones stayed on the table longer. Julia stopped waiting up. She'd just roll to her side of the bed and turn her back to me. I told myself this was what a good man did. Bust his ass now, enjoy it later. I didn't realize that every mile I flew for work was another inch we drifted apart at home. When work started swallowing me whole, I found myself drifting to VFW Post 3290 on Friday nights. I'm not a vet. My old man was. Maybe that's why the place felt familiar. Cheap beer, bad fluorescent lights, walls full of faded photos and flags that actually meant something to the men sitting under them. That's where I met Jack Mercer, retired Marine, backbone straight as a 2x4, hands like sandpaper. We didn't talk about feelings. We talked about duty, about showing up, about what a man's word is supposed to be worth. At the Post, nobody called me dead weight. Nobody cared what I made last year or how many hours I spent on the road. To them, I was just Caleb, the guy who showed up, helped with fish fries, fixed the Wi-Fi, took out the trash. A stand-up guy. That's what Jack called me once. It stuck. Julia came with me a few times. She'd sit stiff in the corner, scrolling her phone. One night in the car, she said, "I just don't fit in there." I didn't say it out loud, but I'd already felt it. Somehow I fit better in that smoky little hall than I did in my own living room. Dinners used to be noisy, Lily talking too fast, Julia telling stories from work, me half listening but happy just to hear their voices. Somewhere along the way, it turned into 3 plates, 3 screens, clinking silverware, and the hum of the fridge filling the silence. Julia started going out more, helping my sister with some legal stuff. Bible study with the girls. Late meeting, don't wait up. The explanations changed, but the pattern didn't. Purse by the door, keys in hand, perfume she didn't wear around the house anymore. Most nights I was too tired to question it. I'd just open the laptop, finish another report, tell myself I was doing my part. One Thursday, I was tying my shoes for yet another trip when Lily poked her head into the hallway. "Dad, are you coming to my game this Saturday?" I could feel the lie forming before I spoke. "I can't, kiddo. I'll make it up to you." She nodded, but her eyes dropped to the floor. That look, that tiny, quiet disappointment, cut deeper than anything Julia had said. Years later, standing in that courtroom, I still saw Lily's face more clearly than any judge's. It was late, the kind of hour where even the highway feels tired. I pulled into the Sunoco off Dublin Granville, running on coffee and cheap fast food after a long day in Marysville. I just needed gas and a minute to breathe. While the tank was filling, I glanced toward the alley behind the little Airbnb tucked next door. Headlights swung across the brick. A silver Lexus eased out slowly, like it didn't want to be seen. I knew that car. Ethan Rowe. At first I thought, no, can't be. Then I saw her. Julia in the passenger seat, hair messy, that soft sweater I'd never seen before, something he probably told her looked good on her. She laughed at something he said and touched his arm like she used to touch mine. They drove right past me, didn't even look. To them, I was just another truck at a pump, invisible. I sat back down in my seat, hands shaking on the steering wheel, staring at the glowing sign out front. 2 hot dogs for $3. I didn't need to follow them. I didn't need a hotel room or a screaming match. My gut already knew the truth. Something between us had just snapped, and there was no going back. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the house looked exactly like it always did. Same maple tree, same porch light, same front door I'd walked through 1,000 times. None of it felt the same. Inside, the place was dark and quiet, just the low hum of the fridge and the furnace kicking on. Julia was in bed, turned away, breathing steady in that way people do when they want you to think they're asleep. I stood in the doorway and just looked at her back. I could have flipped the lights on. I could have thrown the covers back, demanded answers, demanded honesty, demanded something. But I didn't. I was too tired to explode, too tired to tear the whole thing apart in one night. Instead, I stood there, feeling that tired, heavy kind of anger that doesn't burn, it just settles. The kind that sits in your chest and waits. In my head, one thought kept circling. If she's willing to do this, what else is she willing to do? Right there in the doorway, I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to swing wild. I was going to watch. I was going to listen. I was going to wait. If a storm was coming, I wanted to see exactly how she planned to build it. Once you've seen your wife in another man's car, you stop seeing everything else the same way. Little things started screaming at me. Julia would sit on the couch, texting with this tiny smile she tried to hide. The second I walked into the room, the phone flipped face down like it was muscle memory. More late meetings, more helping with paperwork for her sister, more Bible study nights that somehow didn't smell like church when she came home. One evening I hugged her in the kitchen and there it was, that cologne. Not mine, his. Ethan liked the expensive stuff. Now it was on her sweater. I didn't blow up. Instead, the part of my brain I use for work kicked in. Dates, times, excuses. I started logging it all without writing anything down. Just quietly filing away every late night, every weird text, every shift in her tone. If she wanted to rewrite the story of who I was, the broke, absent freeloader husband, fine. But page by page, I was going to remember exactly how she did it. The morning everything truly changed didn't look special at all. I was just trying to grab a file off our shared laptop before a call. Mug of cheap coffee, inbox open. Same routine as always. Then an email slid in on its own. Auto-forwarded. Sender. Ethan Rowe. Subject line with Julia's name in it. I should have closed it. I didn't. I clicked. Once we make him look broke on paper, the judge will have no choice but to rule in your favor. I read that line once. Twice. A third time. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't about her being lonely. This wasn't about some sad, messy affair. This was strategy. This was them turning my whole life, every mile I'd driven, every dollar I'd earned, into a weapon against me. I hit print. The machine started spitting out pages one by one. The sound was nothing, just plastic and gears. But standing there in that dim kitchen light, it felt like something inside my chest was cracking with every sheet that landed in the tray. Cheating had hurt. This felt like attempted murder, not of my body, but of my name. I sat alone at the kitchen table with those printed emails and papers spread out like a crime scene. Same table where we'd eaten birthday cake, argued over homework, talked about Christmas plans. Now it was just me, cold coffee, and proof that my own wife had teamed up to gut me on paper. My mind started doing what it always does, running back through the years, every trip, every late flight, every hotel room where I fell asleep with my laptop open, every time I told Lily, "Dad can't make it, kiddo, I've got work," and promised I'd make it up to her. I've busted my ass for decades, not to buy toys, just to keep the lights on, pay the mortgage, put food on the table, keep this family standing. But sitting there under that yellow kitchen light, the first thing I felt wasn't rage, it was grief. If she could write me off this easily as a freeloader, as dead weight, what did those 22 years mean to her? Were they real? Or was I the only one who believed in the version of us I'd been carrying around? The thought that hit hardest was simple and ugly. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing the man I thought I was for 22 years. When the shaking finally stopped, I did the one thing I know how to do. I went back to the numbers. I pulled up our old tax returns from the email archives, side by side, year by year. At first, it looked normal. W-2s, 1099s, the usual mess of forms you forget about once they're filed. Then one joint return caught my eye. A form that should have been there wasn't. Income that used to show up on one line had magically shrunk on another. Deductions shifted like someone was sliding shells around on a table, hoping no one was really watching. And the signature. My name, written in a way I've never written it in my life. I just stared at it. This wasn't just Julia crying to a lawyer about feeling neglected. This wasn't just an affair with some slick attorney who liked the sound of his own voice. This was paperwork, altered forms, forged signatures. This was federal. It hit me like ice water. If this blew up, I wouldn't just be the bad husband. I could be the guy the IRS came after, the one standing there trying to explain a fraud he didn't commit. That was the moment the story changed in my head. From a broken marriage to a war I hadn't agreed to fight. That night I ended up in the bathroom, hands gripping the sides of the sink, staring at a face I barely recognized. 50-something going on 70, lines I didn't remember earning, eyes that looked more tired than angry. I thought about what I was holding. Emails, tax forms, a forged signature. Enough to blow Julia's life apart. Enough to take Ethan's license and maybe more. The question that wouldn't leave me alone was ugly and simple. If I use this, am I becoming the bitter, vengeful man I've always hated? Then Lily's voice came back to me clear as day. Mom says you don't care about us. That one stung more than any lawyer's accusation. Not because a kid said it, but because her mother fed it to her. Julia hadn't just betrayed me in motel rooms and email threads. She'd taken a wrecking ball to my name in my own daughter's mind. Standing there under that harsh bathroom light, I knew one thing. She'd gone after my honor first. I wasn't going to destroy her for sport, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let her keep burning my life down and calling it truth. At some point, you stop trusting your own judgment. You start thinking, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm seeing ghosts. That's why I needed someone who only trusted numbers. I stuffed the emails, the returns, the printouts into a worn folder and drove to a small CPA office near Westerville Square. The bell over the door jingled when I walked in. Same place that's done my taxes for years. "Caleb," Tom Jensen said, eyeing the folder. "That looks like trouble." "You have no idea," I answered and handed it over. Tom didn't rush. He never does. He sat there under the humming fluorescent light, flipping through page after page, tapping his pen, eyebrows knitting tighter the further he went. I watched his face more than the papers. I knew those expressions better than most audits I'd ever done. Finally, he set everything down and looked me dead in the eye. "Caleb," he said quietly, "this isn't sloppy. This is intentional." That word hit harder than any accusation Julia had thrown at me. Intentional. Not a mistake. Not confusion. Not carelessness. A choice. In that moment, whatever part of me still wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt died on the spot. Tom leaned back in his chair, the papers between us like a loaded gun on the desk. He tapped one of the returns with his pen and said very plainly, "You need a lawyer, not a mild one, a real one." I'd been bracing for something like that, but hearing it out loud still knocked the air out of me. He walked me through it piece by piece. "If you stay quiet, this isn't just a messy divorce. You're exposed on taxes, in court, with custody. They've set this up so you look unstable, irresponsible, and broke on paper. If the judge buys that, you don't just lose money. You lose your kid. You lose your name." For the first time, I saw the whole board, not just my little square of hurt. This wasn't a jealous wife and a slimy lawyer anymore. This was a legal ambush. I didn't feel like a husband licking his wounds. I felt like a man pushed to the edge of a cliff and handed a blindfold. On the drive home, one thing settled in my gut. I was going to fight. But not by screaming, not by throwing punches. If they wanted a war in court, that's where I'd beat them. With a lawyer, with paper, and with the truth. When the numbers guy tells you it's war, you go find someone who understands battle. I drove over to Jack Mercer's place, a small one-story not far from the VFW. He opened the door, squinted at me, and said, "You look like hell, kid. Get in here." I handed him the folder and sat down at his kitchen table. Old wood, coffee rings, a bowl of keys, and loose change in the middle. Jack put on his glasses and started reading. He didn't ask questions, didn't interrupt, just turned page after page, jaw tightening a little more each time. When he finished, he set the stack down and looked at me the way only a man who's seen too much can. "So," he said, "they want to bury you." "I don't want revenge," I told him. "I want fairness. I want the truth to mean something again. For my kid. For me." Jack nodded slowly. "When someone takes a swing at your honor," he said, "don't swing back. Step aside and let the punch break their own hand." That line went straight through me. In that moment, the fog lifted a little. This wasn't about burning Julia and Ethan to the ground. It was about standing my ground so firmly, with so much truth at my back, that the only thing their lies could hurt was them. I went home and shut myself in the small room we called an office. Just me, the hum of the computer, and a desk that suddenly felt like a war table. I laid everything out in front of me. Printed emails, tax returns, old bills, travel itineraries, screenshots, little pieces of the life I'd been living and the story they were trying to tell about me. For years, I'd been the guy companies called when their systems were a mess. I'd walk in, map the problem, build a plan, fix it. That part of my brain woke up. I drove to Staples, bought the thickest binder they had and a pack of tabs. Came home, sat down, and started sorting. Emails, taxes, travel, phone records, work contracts, witness notes. Tab by tab, I stopped thinking like a husband who'd been cheated on and started thinking like a consultant handed a dirty job. How do I build a case so tight they can't wiggle out of it? One thought settled, cold and clear. If they wanted to bury me on paper, I was going to use paper to dig myself out. The nights that followed all looked the same from the outside. House dark, hallway light on, the low whir of the printer in that little office, spitting out my life one sheet at a time. Emails between Julia and Ethan. Calendar invites that didn't match the excuses she'd given me. GPS logs. Cloud photos that were never meant for my eyes. I'd print, wait, pick up the warm pages, slide them into plastic sleeves, and click them into the binder. Every time the rings snapped shut around a new section, my chest tightened. I cross-checked my work trips against her family emergencies. I lined up timestamps from text messages with receipts from gas stations and Airbnbs. It stopped being just proof they were wrong. It started to feel like documentation for a death I hadn't signed off on. Somewhere between the phone records and the last batch of screenshots, it hit me. I wasn't just proving what they'd done. I was signing the death certificate of a 22-year marriage. When I finally closed the binder that night, it made a dull, final sound. Like a door, somewhere deep inside me, swinging shut and locking. It was close to midnight when I heard the softest little knock on the office door. Not the way an adult knocks, the way a kid does when they're not sure if they're allowed in. "Yeah?" I said. Lily cracked the door and stepped in, bare feet, big t-shirt, hair a mess from bed. Her eyes went straight to the thick binder on my desk. "Dad, what are you doing?" I glanced at the tabs, at the mess of my life organized like a case file. "Just work stuff," I lied, and we both knew it wasn't the whole truth. She shifted on her feet. "Mom says you're trying to punish her," she said quietly. "She says you're different now." That one went in deep. I started to defend myself, then stopped. She studied my face for a long second, like she was trying to decide who to believe. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I'm glad you're not yelling or breaking stuff. You're just steady. I needed that." After she went back to bed, I sat there staring at the closed door. She was caught in the middle, but she'd just handed me a mirror. Whatever I did next, I had to be the man she thought she saw, not the monster her mother was trying to write into the story. A few days later, I walked into the downtown office of a man named Richard Benton. Old school place. Wood paneling, crowded bookshelves, diplomas yellowed at the edges. He looked like he'd been fighting in court since before I was born. I set the binder on his desk. It landed with a heavy thud. He opened it without much ceremony and started flipping through the tabs. Emails, taxes, travel logs, phone records. Every few pages he'd make a small sound. Or nod slightly, like pieces were clicking into place. After a while, he closed it and sat back. "You've basically done half my job already," he said. "Most guys walk in here with nothing but a rant." I didn't feel proud, just tired. Richard laid out the plan in that calm, measured voice lawyers use when they've seen it all. "We let them talk first," he said. "We let Ethan and Julia paint the picture they want. The more they say, the more room they have to lie. And when they're done," he tapped the binder, "we let this speak. When we go back in there, we won't need to raise our voices. The documents will do it for us." For the first time, my anger felt organized. This wasn't just pain anymore, it was a strategy, and I wasn't alone in it. The 2 weeks before the second hearing felt strange, not calm, just suspended, like the air right before a thunderstorm when everything goes still for no good reason. I cut back on travel, took more remote contracts, woke up in my own bed more days in a row than I had in years. Most mornings I ended up at the same Tim Hortons on State Street. "Black coffee, 2 creams on the side," the kid at the counter would say, not even asking anymore. "Yeah," I'd answer, and sit by the window with my binder and a worn-out backpack at my feet, sipping coffee and thinking about how expensive justice can really get. At home, Julia and I moved like roommates who didn't like each other very much. She'd sleep in the spare room. We'd pass in the hallway, polite, careful, no eye contact longer than necessary. I kept coming back to the same thought. I didn't want to destroy her. Despite everything, that wasn't what I was after. But I couldn't let her destroy me either. Not my name, not my work, not my relationship with Lily. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was self-defense. The morning of the hearing, the sky over Riverside County had that flat gray look, like even the weather couldn't be bothered to pick a side. I parked, grabbed the binder from the passenger seat, and walked up the courthouse steps. The building smelled the same as last time: old paper, burned coffee, and a hint of cleaning chemicals that never quite win. The hallway outside the courtroom was full of other people's disasters, couples not looking at each other, lawyers checking watches, a guy in overalls arguing quietly with a woman over a manila folder that was probably their whole life. I spotted Julia and Ethan down the hall. She was dressed sharp, makeup just right, but her eyes were swollen in a way concealer can't fix. He was in another perfect suit, but his hand was squeezing his briefcase like a stress ball. Richard stepped up beside me, straightening his tie. "You ready?" he asked. I looked at the heavy door to the courtroom, then at the binder in my hand. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. Last time I'd walked in there feeling like a man on trial for his own existence. This time, I wasn't being dragged in. I was bringing something with me. Back inside Riverside County Courthouse, it almost felt like déjà vu. Ethan stood up, smoothed his tie, and launched into the same song he'd sung the first time. "Your Honor, my client has endured years of emotional neglect. Mr. Hartman has been unstable, absent, and has contributed very little to the marital estate." There it was again. Unstable, absent, contributes very little. He didn't even bother changing the script. Julia sat beside him, chin trembling just enough, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a tissue. If you didn't know better, you'd think she'd been dragged in there against her will, instead of walking in on the arm of the man who helped her forge my life on paper. I felt my jaw tighten, but I stayed still. That was the plan. Let them talk. Ethan was mid-sentence when Judge Keller lifted his hand. "That's enough for now, Mr. Rowe," he said, irritation creeping into his voice. "Before we entertain your characterization of Mr. Hartman, we need to address the financial discrepancies raised at our last session." The whole room seemed to shift. For the first time, the spotlight wasn't on the loser husband in the backstory. It was on them. Richard rose slowly beside me. "Your Honor, if it pleases the court, the respondent would like to submit additional evidence related to those discrepancies." Judge Keller nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Benton." I stood just long enough to place the binder on the table between us and flip it open. The metal rings gave a soft, sharp click that somehow cut through the quiet room. From where I sat, I could see the tabs lined up like little flags. Emails, taxes, travel, phone, work, witnesses. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Julia lean forward, eyes locking onto those pages. She knew exactly what was in there. You could see the color draining from her face before a single word was read. Ethan shifted in his chair. He swallowed hard, adjusted his tie for the third time in a row, and suddenly looked a lot less like the confident attorney and a lot more like a man who'd finally spotted the hole in the ice he'd been dancing on. Richard rested his hand lightly on the open binder. Up until that moment, it had just been paper and plastic to me. Sitting there in that courtroom, it felt like the only weapon I had, and for once, it was pointed in the right direction. Richard flipped to the first tab and slid a printed email toward Judge Keller. "Exhibit A, Your Honor," he said. "An email from Mr. Rowe to Mrs. Hartman." He cleared his throat and read it out loud, word for word. "Once we make him look broke on paper, the judge will have no choice but to rule in your favor." You could have heard a pin drop. No one shifted, no one coughed. The only sound was the soft rustle of paper as the judge turned the page to read it again for himself. Julia's hand flew to her mouth. "Those were personal emails," she stammered. Richard didn't even flinch. "Sent from a shared laptop," he said calmly, "about ongoing legal strategy. Not very personal, legally speaking." Judge Keller turned his eyes to Ethan. "Is this your email address, Mr. Rowe?" Ethan's lips moved before any sound came out. "Yes, Your Honor. he finally managed. That was the moment the private little scheme they'd been so sure was locked away in some inbox became public record. Whatever dignity they thought they'd kept in the shadows had just been dragged into the light. Richard didn't waste the opening. "Exhibit B, Your Honor," he said, flipping to the next tab. "A joint tax return with Mr. Hartman's signature forged and key numbers altered." He walked the judge through it. Missing forms, shifted income, deductions that made no sense unless someone was trying to hide money. My name, in someone else's handwriting, staring up from the page. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. "Exhibit C," Richard continued. "GPS records from Mrs. Hartman's phone. Dates and times lined up neatly with nights she claimed to be helping her sister, and instead pinged next to that same Airbnb behind the Sunoco on Dublin Granville." More whispers. A low, disbelieving, "Wow." "Exhibit D," he said, turning another page. Photos of Mrs. Hartman and Mr. Rowe together automatically synced to the couple's shared cloud account. There they were. Julia and Ethan, laughing in bad lighting, arms around each other. Not rumors, not guesses, proof. Every exhibit was another crack in the innocent victim story Julia had tried to sell. For the first time, I felt eyes in that room stop looking at me like a problem, and start looking at me like a man who'd been telling the truth all along. Judge Keller set the papers down and leaned back, eyes fixed on Ethan. "Mr. Rowe," he said, voice flat, "did you assist in preparing or modifying these tax forms?" Ethan shifted in his seat. "Your Honor, if there were any issues, they were likely overlooked. A clerical error at most." Judge Keller's eyebrows lifted. "We do not overlook hundreds of thousands of dollars, Mr. Rowe." The word hundreds hung in the air like a weight. Ethan tried again, stumbling over phrases like miscommunication and good faith, but the swagger was gone. His voice had that thin, shaky edge a man gets when he realizes the ground under him isn't solid anymore. "This matter," the judge said finally, "will be referred to the Ohio Bar Association for review, and possibly to the IRS. The court takes this level of misrepresentation very seriously." Ethan's face went the color of old paper. He nodded, but it looked more like a flinch. For the first time since all this started, I wasn't the one standing on the edge of the cliff. I didn't feel triumph. Not exactly. But I did feel something close to justice. For once, the risk wasn't all on my side of the room. When the judge was done with Ethan, he turned to Julia. "Mrs. Hartman," he said, "this severely damages your credibility before this court." Her composure cracked. Tears came fast, not the controlled, camera-ready ones from earlier, but the raw, panicked kind. "I didn't mean to," she choked out. "Ethan said we had to. Caleb, please." My name sounded strange in her mouth. Not like a husband's name, more like a lifeline she suddenly remembered. For 22 years, whenever Julia got in over her head, I was the one who stepped in. Fixed the mess, smoothed it over, paid the bill, took the blame. I met her eyes for a second. I didn't nod, didn't shake my head. I just didn't move. I wasn't angry in that moment. I wasn't glad either. I was just done. In my head, the words were simple. I've spent 2 decades saving you from yourself. Today, I'm saving myself instead. And for the first time in our entire marriage, when the consequences came for her, I let them. When it was finally time for the ruling, the whole room felt like it was holding its breath. Judge Keller adjusted his glasses, looked down at the papers, then at us. "Premarital assets," he said, "remain with Mr. Hartman." That meant my retirement, my savings from before we ever said I do. Still mine. "The marital home," he continued, "will be awarded to Mr. Hartman." I felt that one in my chest, not as a win, just as solid ground. Custody of the minor child will be shared, 50-50. No superior parent narrative, no weekend dad. Mrs. Hartman, he added, will be responsible for her own legal fees. And one more time for the record, he said the words about Ethan, the Bar Association, possible IRS involvement. Not said loudly, but clearly enough that everyone heard. Behind me, I caught a few older men in the gallery give the smallest nods. Men who'd seen their own battles. Men who understood what it means to walk out with your name still intact. I didn't pump a fist. I didn't smile. When it was over, I just stood up, squared my shoulders, and walked out of that courtroom without looking back. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt clean. There was no screaming the day Julia left, no shattered plates, no dramatic speeches, just cardboard boxes. She moved around the house quietly, pulling her life off shelves and out of drawers. A stack of clothes here, a box of framed photos there. The sound of packing tape ripping across cardboard was louder than either of us. I carried a few boxes out to her car without saying much. Old habit, I guess. Helping her, even now. The driveway felt smaller with the two of us out there and no words left that hadn't already been ruined. At the door, she paused with her keys in her hand. "I'll pick up Lily after school next week," she said. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "We messed this up." Just logistics. "Okay," I answered. She walked to the car, put the last box in, and pulled out of the driveway we'd once been so proud to own. No looking back. Just taillights at the end of the street, then nothing. When the house went quiet, it was a different kind of silence than before, not tense, not waiting for the next fight, just empty. That was the real end. Not a bang, just a door closing and staying closed. A few weeks after the dust settled, I was driving up the highway when I noticed something strange. The giant billboard that used to have Ethan's smug face on it, arms folded, fighting for families in big blue letters, was gone. New ad, different lawyer, different slogan, like he'd never been there. Later that week, I checked his firm's website. Buried at the bottom was a cold little statement. Due to conduct inconsistent with firm values, Mr. Rowe is no longer with the practice. No drama, no details, just corporate ice. Word travels fast in a town like ours. Someone at the courthouse mentioned an ethics panel. Someone else muttered bar association and investigation in the same sentence. I didn't go looking for updates. I didn't need a play-by-play. I thought I'd feel triumph. The big movie moment where the bad guy falls off the cliff and the music swells. But at my age, revenge doesn't taste sweet. It feels more like a fever finally breaking. You don't celebrate. You just stop shivering. Ethan was facing his own consequences now. That was between him, the bar, and whatever conscience he had left. For me, things just felt settled. Life didn't turn magical after court. Bills still came. Work still needed doing. The truck still needed gas and oil changes. But the edges got softer. Most mornings I'd swing by Tim Hortons on State Street. The kid at the counter would see me walk in and say, "Morning, Mr. Hartman? Black coffee? 2 creams on the side?" Hearing my own name without a judge attached to it felt oddly new. I took fewer travel-heavy jobs, more remote projects, no more back-to-back flights just to prove I was providing. Some nights the laptop stayed closed and the world kept spinning anyway. Evenings got simple. Sometimes I'd just sit on the front porch with a mug in my hand, watching cars roll past under the streetlights. No courtroom, no strategies, no waiting for someone to walk through the door with a lie already loaded. The house sounded different too. Lily's footsteps, her music down the hall, the clink of dishes after dinner, no tension humming in the walls. One night it hit me. For the first time since I signed those mortgage papers, I was actually living in the home I'd spent years breaking my back to pay for. Not just sleeping there between battles, actually living in it. Most days with Lily started to feel normal again. I'd pick her up from school, she'd slide into the passenger seat, drop her backpack, and start talking about tests, drama with friends, some teacher who gave too much homework. She steered clear of talking about her mom, and I didn't push it. Kids deserve at least one parent who isn't cross-examining them. One night we were at the table eating cheap spaghetti out of chipped bowls. The TV was off. It was just the clink of forks and the hum of the fridge. Out of nowhere, Lily said, "Mom told me you were trying to ruin her life." The words landed heavier than I expected. I set my fork down. "I'm not trying to ruin anything," I said. "I'm trying to protect myself. From lies." She didn't answer right away. She just watched me, really watched me, like she was checking if the words matched the man. Finally she nodded, just once. "I know," she said. "I can see that now." 7 simple words. But coming from my kid, they felt like someone had finally wiped the dirt off my name. The final court date wasn't dramatic. No arguments, no testimony, just signatures and stamps. Legal language read into the record in a flat voice by a clerk who'd done this 1,000 times before. I signed my name where they told me to, initialed here, dated there. Each stroke of the pen felt less like an ending and more like filing away something that had been over for a long time already. When we were done, the judge offered a polite nod, the kind people give when they're closing a file, not witnessing a tragedy. I walked out of the building alone, past the metal detectors, past the bulletin boards, past other couples waiting for their turn to tear a life in half. Stepping through those big glass doors, it hit me. Today isn't the day I lost my wife. I lost her years ago in late nights, in lies, in backseat cars and forged documents. Today is the day I got myself back. It didn't feel like freedom with fireworks. It felt like clocking out of a 20-year shift in a factory full of smoke and finally breathing clean air. I went back to VFW Post 3290 on a Friday night, first time since everything was over. Same greasy fish fry, same folding tables, same old stories looped for the 100th time. Jack was sitting at his usual spot, paper plate full of fried cod and coleslaw. He looked up when I walked in, gave me that sideways grin. "Looks like they didn't break you," he said. I sat down across from him, feeling the truth of it in my bones. "Doesn't feel like I won," I said. "Feels more like I finally set the weight down." He nodded, like he'd been waiting for me to figure that out. Took a sip of his coffee and said, "Truth is a quiet friend, kid. Doesn't show up in a fancy suit, doesn't shout. It just stands behind you when it matters." I thought about that courtroom, the binder, the evidence, the way I didn't have to scream or throw punches. I just had to let the truth walk in ahead of me. Sitting in that noisy little hall, I realized I hadn't beaten them with rage. I'd survived because truth had my back when nothing else did. Driving home that night, I rolled the window down even though the air had a bite to it. Ohio cold. Dry leaves skittering across the road. The faint smell of chimney smoke hanging over the neighborhood. That thin line between fall and winter. For once, my mind wasn't replaying the courtroom. No more echo of Freeloader. No more slow motion of Julia at the plaintiff's table. No more judge's voice in my head. It was quiet up there. I turned onto my street and saw the porch light on, warm against the dark. Lily's bedroom window glowed soft yellow. Her shadow moved across the blinds. The house didn't look like a battlefield anymore. It just looked lived in. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a second with the engine off, listening to it tick as it cooled. I realized I wasn't bracing for anything. Not a fight, not a lie, not another shoe ready to drop. All that was left was this simple, solid feeling. I'd been dragged through hell, but I never had to lower myself to crawl. I'd stood my ground without screaming. And for the first time in a long time, I actually liked the man I was driving home as. Let me say this straight, man to man. Real revenge isn't fire. It's not yelling in someone's face, punching holes in walls, smashing dishes at midnight. It's not burning your whole life down just to prove a point. When you get to my age, real revenge is clarity. It's knowing exactly who you are when the dust settles. It's walking out of a courthouse or a house or a job with your head up because you didn't have to lie, cheat, or crawl to survive it. Real revenge is standing your ground without dropping to their level. It's saying, "I'm done being the villain in a story you wrote about me," and then letting the facts speak louder than any tantrum ever could. To me, it's this. Let the truth walk into the room first. You just stand behind it. No fireworks, no dramatic speeches. Just a quiet, steady refusal to let lies define you. And if you've ever been pushed into a corner like I was, you already know this isn't just my story. If you're still listening, let me ask you something. Have you ever been called dead weight? A freeloader? Ever had someone look at everything you've done, everything you've carried, and reduce you to a punchline? Have you ever felt like your story was being written by somebody else? An ex, a boss, a family member? And you're standing there in your own life, watching them narrate it wrong. Here's what I learned the hard way. You don't have to scream to take it back. You don't have to destroy anybody to win. You just have to let the truth get loud enough that you don't need to. Paperwork, receipts, the way your kid looks at you when you show up instead of just promising you will. That's the stuff that speaks. So ask yourself honestly, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet, walked away, exposed the lies? And if you're still here with me now, then maybe this isn't just about my life anymore. So that's the whole road. I went from standing in a courtroom being called a freeloader in front of strangers to hearing a judge read out the truth I'd been quietly breaking my back to live. From a worn-out man who thought working himself into the ground was enough, to a man who finally understands that how you stand matters more than how hard you swing. If there's one thing I want you to walk away with, it's this. You don't need rage to fight back. You don't need to scream, break things, or burn your life down just to prove you're not who they say you are. You don't need rage to fight back. Just let the truth speak loud enough. If you've ever been in my shoes, or close enough to feel the heat, would you have exposed the lawyer too? Would you have done more? Less? Tell me in the comments. Share this with a man who's being painted as the villain in a story he didn't write. Hit follow or subscribe if you want more stories that don't treat you like a joke. And who knows, maybe the next story I tell will be yours.